The autumn rain fell softly against the windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat at his desk, reviewing the morning's correspondence. Among the usual stack of official invitations and state papers lay a simple handwritten letter that would change everything. The envelope bore no royal seal, no official letterhead, just the careful handwriting of someone who had taken great care to reach out. Sarah Mitchell, a single mother from a small town in Yorkshire, had written about her 8-year-old daughter Emma, who was battling a rare form of childhood cancer. The letter wasn't asking for money or publicity, but for something much simpler, yet infinitely more precious. A moment of hope for a little girl who had been fighting for her life for over a year. Emma had been following the royal family's activities through news clips her mother showed her on their old tablet. Despite her illness, the child had developed a particular fascination with Catherine's charity work and William's efforts to support mental health initiatives. Sarah explained in her letter that Emma often spoke about how the royal couple seemed to genuinely care about people, especially children facing difficult circumstances. The letter described how Emma would spend hours in her hospital bed, drawing pictures of what she imagined royal life to be like. She created elaborate drawings of castles, horses, and beautiful gowns, but always included children from hospitals and schools in her artwork. Her mother noted that Emma seemed to understand that being royal meant helping others, even though she was just 8 years old. William read the letter twice, then walked down the hall to find Catherine, who was in the nursery with their youngest child. When he shared Sarah's words, Catherine's eyes immediately filled with tears. Without hesitation, they both knew they had to respond, but not in the way most people might expect from members of the royal family. Instead of arranging a formal visit or sending an official response, Catherine suggested something different. She remembered her own childhood, when small gestures of kindness from unexpected sources had meant everything. They decided to reach out personally, as parents rather than as public figures. That evening, Catherine sat down with her own stationery, not the official royal correspondence paper, but simple, elegant cards she kept for personal use. She wrote a heartfelt note to Emma, sharing some of her own thoughts about courage and kindness. She mentioned how much she admired children who faced challenges with such bravery, and how Emma's artwork, as described by her mother, sounded absolutely wonderful. But Catherine didn't stop there. She included a small package with a letter, a selection of art supplies, some photographs from recent charity visits to children's hospitals, and a simple bracelet that she had worn during one of her public appearances. It wasn't expensive or elaborate, but it was personal, something that had been part of Catherine's own experience that she wanted to share. William added his own note, written in his characteristic straightforward style. He told Emma about his work with air ambulance services and how he had met many brave children like her. He shared that true courage wasn't about not being scared, but about continuing to find joy and hope even when things were difficult. He included a small pin from his RAF uniform, explaining that it represented the teamwork and support that helped everyone get through tough times. The package was sent through regular mail, without fanfare or publicity. William and Catherine asked their private secretary to ensure it was handled quietly, wanting Emma and her family to receive it as a personal gesture rather than a public relations moment. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived at Kensington Palace. This time, it was from Emma herself, written in careful child's handwriting with help from her mother. Emma's excitement practically leaped off the page as she described receiving the package. She had been having a particularly difficult week of treatment when it arrived, and her mother said it was the first time in months that Emma had smiled so widely. Emma's letter included one of her drawings, a picture of herself, William, and Catherine standing together outside a hospital, all wearing superhero capes. In the drawing, they were visiting other children, bringing them art supplies and hope. At the bottom of the page, in her careful writing, Emma had added, "Thank you for being real superheroes." The drawing moved both William and Catherine deeply. They realized that Emma had understood something profound about their role that many adults struggled to grasp. She saw their position not as one of privilege and ceremony, but as an opportunity to bring comfort and hope to others who needed it most. Catherine decided to frame Emma's drawing and hang it in her private office. Every time she looked at it, she was reminded of why their work mattered beyond the official duties and public appearances. This child, facing her own enormous challenges, had seen them not as distant royals, but as real people who cared about others. Word of Emma's situation began to spread quietly through their circle of close friends and family, not through any official channels or media reports, but through the kind of personal sharing that happens when people are genuinely moved by a story. Prince Harry, during one of his regular calls with his brother, asked about the little girl from Yorkshire, having heard Catherine mention her to Meghan. The response was immediate and heartfelt. Harry and Meghan sent their own package to Emma, including a book about strong, brave girls throughout history and a personal note encouraging Emma to keep drawing and dreaming. Other members of the royal family began asking about Emma too, each wanting to contribute in their own way to supporting this remarkable child and her family. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Emma's story had quietly reached some of the healthcare workers at the hospital where she was receiving treatment. These dedicated professionals, who saw children like Emma every day, were deeply moved by the royal family's personal attention to one of their patients. Dr. Patricia Holmes, Emma's primary oncologist, wrote to William and Catherine expressing how much their gesture had meant not just to Emma, but to the entire ward. She explained that Emma had shared her gifts with other children, reading the notes aloud to anyone who would listen and showing off her special bracelet and RAF pin with enormous pride. The impact rippled through the children's ward in ways no one had anticipated. Other young patients began asking their parents to help them write letters to people who inspired them. Some wrote to teachers, others to sports figures, and a few to local heroes in their communities. Emma's experience had shown them that reaching out, that expressing gratitude and connection was something powerful they could do even while facing their own health challenges. Sarah Mitchell watched this transformation in her daughter with amazement. Emma, who had been withdrawn and fearful since her diagnosis, began engaging more actively with her treatment and with other patients. She started a small art group in the children's ward, teaching other kids some of the techniques she had learned and sharing the special art supplies Catherine had sent. The doctors noticed a change too. Emma's overall demeanor improved significantly. While her medical prognosis remained challenging, her emotional resilience had strengthened in remarkable ways. She approached each day with renewed energy and optimism, qualities that her medical team knew were crucial for her recovery process. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine found themselves thinking about Emma and families like hers more frequently. They began to understand how their personal attention, separate from their official duties, could create profound impacts in individual lives. This realization started to shape how they approached their royal responsibilities. Catherine began incorporating more personal elements into her official charity visits. Instead of simply touring facilities and meeting administrators, she made time to sit with individual children to hear their stories and to share small moments that went beyond the formal requirements of royal protocol. William found himself approaching his mental health advocacy work with renewed focus on the individual human stories behind the statistics. Emma's letter had reminded him that behind every policy discussion and public awareness campaign were real families facing real challenges, people who needed to know that they weren't forgotten or alone. The correspondence between Emma and the royal couple continued throughout the autumn. Emma's letters became a bright spot in their week, filled with updates about her treatment, new drawings she had created, and observations about life in the hospital that were both heartbreaking and surprisingly wise for such a young child. Emma wrote about the other children she had met, describing their courage and humor in ways that revealed her growing maturity and empathy. She shared her hopes for the future, to become an artist who created pictures that made sick children feel better, to have a house with a garden where she could grow flowers, and to meet William and Catherine in person someday, so she could thank them properly for their kindness. Each letter from Emma reminded William and Catherine that their most important work happened not in the grand ceremonial moments, but in these quiet connections with individuals who needed to know that they mattered. Emma's courage in the face of her illness, her determination to spread joy to other children even while battling her own challenges, exemplified the kind of spirit they hoped to encourage and support through their public work. As autumn turned toward winter, Emma's latest letter brought news that her treatment was progressing better than doctors had initially hoped. While her journey was far from over, the medical team was cautiously optimistic about her response to the latest therapy protocols. Emma credited her improved outlook partly to knowing that the prince and princess were thinking of her, giving her extra strength to face each difficult day. The simple handwritten letter that had arrived on that rainy autumn morning had grown into something neither William nor Catherine could have anticipated. It had reminded them of the real purpose behind their public roles and had connected them to a remarkable little girl whose courage and spirit had touched their hearts in ways that formal state duties never could. Emma's story was becoming more than just a correspondence between a sick child and the royal family. It was evolving into a powerful reminder that sometimes the most meaningful impacts come not from grand gestures or public announcements, but from quiet moments of human connection, from taking the time to see and acknowledge the individual people behind the causes and statistics that define their public work. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the grounds of Kensington Palace in pristine white snow. As Catherine watched the snowflakes dance outside her window, she thought about Emma, wondering if the little girl was able to see the snow from her hospital room window. It had been 3 weeks since their last correspondence, and Catherine found herself checking the mail each day with unusual anticipation. The bond that had developed through their letters had become something precious and unexpected. Catherine had always taken her royal duties seriously, understanding the importance of her public role in supporting various charities and causes. But Emma's letters had awakened something different, a deeply personal connection that transcended the formal boundaries of royal protocol. When the next letter finally arrived, it came with surprising news. Emma's treatment had progressed so well that she was being allowed to spend Christmas at home for the first time in over a year. The letter practically vibrated with excitement as Emma described her plans for the holidays, her anticipation of sleeping in her own bed again, and her mother's promise to make her favorite gingerbread cookies. But what moved Catherine most was Emma's invitation. In her careful child's handwriting, Emma had asked if perhaps, maybe if it wouldn't be too much trouble, William and Catherine might like to see some of her artwork in person. She had been creating a special collection of drawings inspired by their correspondence, and she wondered if they might ever be near Yorkshire during their travels. Catherine immediately brought the letter to William, who was in his study preparing for an upcoming engagement. As he read Emma's words, a smile spread across his face. Without discussion, they both knew what their response would be. The following week, William had a series of engagements in northern England that could easily include a personal detour to Yorkshire. The arrangements were made quietly, without media attention or official announcements. William and Catherine would visit Emma's family home as private individuals rather than in their official capacity. Their security team coordinated with local authorities to ensure the visit could happen safely while maintaining the personal, intimate nature that made it so meaningful. Sarah Mitchell received the call 3 days before the visit. When the private secretary explained that the prince and princess would like to accept Emma's invitation, Sarah was so stunned she had to sit down. Emma, who was napping on a couch nearby, woke to find her mother crying happy tears and immediately wanted to know what had happened. When Emma learned that William and Catherine were actually coming to their house, her reaction was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. The 8-year-old immediately began planning what she would show them, which drawings she would display, and what questions she wanted to ask them about their work with children. The preparations in the Mitchell household were unlike anything the small Yorkshire town had ever seen. But these weren't preparations for a formal royal visit with red carpets and ceremonial protocols. Instead, Sarah and Emma focused on the personal touches that would make William and Catherine feel welcome in their modest home. Emma insisted on baking cookies herself, despite her limited energy. She wanted to offer them something she had made with her own hands, just as they had sent her personal items that held special meaning. Sarah helped her daughter prepare a small gallery of her artwork throughout their living room, each piece carefully mounted and displayed with the pride of a professional exhibition. The evening before the visit, Emma could barely contain her excitement. She had laid out her favorite dress, a simple blue one that she thought might remind Catherine of some of the outfits she had seen in photographs. She practiced what she would say, how she would show them around their small house, and how she would present the special drawing she had created just for this occasion. That same evening, at Kensington Palace, Catherine was feeling her own mixture of anticipation and nervousness. This visit felt different from any official engagement she had ever undertaken. There would be no crowds, no formal presentations, no carefully scripted interactions. It would be just two parents visiting a remarkable child and her equally remarkable mother, sharing a few hours together as people rather than as public figures. Catherine chose her outfit carefully, selecting something warm and comfortable rather than formal. She wanted Emma to see her as the person behind the public role, someone who could sit on a living room floor and look at drawings, someone who was genuinely interested in an 8-year-old's artwork and stories. William spent time that evening reading through all of Emma's letters again, wanting to remember every detail she had shared about her treatment, her hopes, and her observations about life. He was struck again by the wisdom and resilience this child had shown, and he felt honored that she had invited them into her world. The morning of the visit dawned clear and cold. William and Catherine made the drive to Yorkshire in a simple vehicle, accompanied only by their essential security team. As they approached the small town where Emma lived, Catherine noticed how different it felt from their usual destinations. No crowds waiting, no media presence, just ordinary people going about their daily lives in a community that would soon host a very extraordinary visit. Emma had been awake since dawn, checking and rechecking her preparations. When the call came that their visitors had arrived in town, she positioned herself by the front window, practically bouncing with anticipation. Sarah had to remind her several times to breathe and try to stay calm. When the car pulled up to their modest terraced house, Emma's excitement was impossible to contain. But as William and Catherine approached the front door, both carrying small wrapped packages, Emma suddenly became shy. The reality of the moment, that the Prince and Princess of Wales were actually walking up to her front door, was almost overwhelming. Sarah opened the door to find Catherine smiling warmly, immediately putting both mother and daughter at ease. The first moments were careful and gentle, with William and Catherine allowing Emma to adjust to their presence at her own pace. They had both learned from their extensive work with children that the most meaningful connections happened when young people felt comfortable and in control. Catherine knelt down to Emma's eye level, complimenting her on the beautiful decoration she could see through the doorway. Emma's shyness began to melt away as she realized that Catherine was genuinely interested in what she had prepared. William followed Catherine's lead, commenting on how lovely their home felt and how excited he was to see Emma's artwork. The tour of Emma's gallery was unlike any museum visit William and Catherine had ever experienced. Each drawing came with a detailed explanation from Emma about what had inspired it, what technique she had used, and what story it was meant to tell. Her enthusiasm for her art was infectious, and both visitors found themselves genuinely captivated by her creativity and talent. One drawing in particular caught Catherine's attention. It showed a hospital ward transformed into a magical garden, with children in hospital gowns playing among flowers and butterflies. Emma explained that she had created it after one of her treatments, imagining how wonderful it would be if hospitals could feel more like happy places rather than scary ones. The drawing sparked a conversation about Emma's ideas for making hospitals more welcoming for children. Her suggestions were surprisingly sophisticated: gardens where children could go for fresh air, art studios where they could create while receiving treatment, and spaces where families could cook meals together to maintain some normalcy during long hospital stays. William was particularly moved by Emma's insights about the emotional needs of families facing medical challenges. Despite being only 8 years old and dealing with her own serious illness, Emma had developed a profound understanding of how healthcare experiences affected entire families, not just patients. The special drawing Emma had created for the visit was presented with great ceremony. It depicted William and Catherine not in their formal royal roles, but as she imagined them at home with their children, playing games and telling stories. The drawing captured something essential about how Emma saw them, as parents first, royal figures second. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she studied the drawing. Emma had somehow captured the balance she and William tried to maintain between their public duties and their roles as parents. The child's perception was remarkably accurate. This was exactly how Catherine hoped people would see them, as real people with families of their own who understood the joys and challenges of raising children. The afternoon continued with Emma, showing them her collection of books, her other hobbies, and even her room, which she had decorated with some of the photographs Catherine had included in her packages. William was particularly interested in Emma's collection of model airplanes, and they spent time discussing his work as a pilot and her fascination with flying. But perhaps the most meaningful part of the visit came when Emma asked if they would like to meet some of her friends from the hospital who lived nearby. Several other children and families had become close friends during their shared experiences with treatment, and Emma had hoped to introduce them to William and Catherine. Within an hour, the Mitchells' small living room was filled with children and parents who had supported each other through various medical challenges. William and Catherine found themselves in the middle of an informal gathering that felt more like a family reunion than a royal visit. The children shared their own stories, showed off their artwork and projects, and created the kind of authentic, joyful atmosphere that reminded both visitors why their work mattered so much. One 10-year-old boy named James, who had been Emma's roommate during several hospital stays, presented William with a hand-carved wooden airplane he had made during his recovery. He explained that Emma had told him about William's flying experience, and he wanted to give him something that represented their shared interest in aviation. A 6-year-old girl named Lucy, who was in remission from leukemia, shyly offered Catherine a small bouquet of flowers she had picked from her grandmother's garden. She explained that Emma had told her how much Catherine liked flowers, and she wanted to give her something beautiful to remember their meeting. As the afternoon progressed, William and Catherine realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This group of children and families brought together by difficult circumstances had created their own support network based on friendship, understanding, and mutual care. Emma had been one of the catalysts for this community, using her natural empathy and leadership to help other children feel less alone. The parents in the room shared their own stories with William and Catherine, describing how their children's friendships had made the medical journey more bearable. They talked about late-night phone calls when someone was scared, shared celebrations when test results were positive, and the way the children supported each other through setbacks and challenges. Sarah Mitchell watched the scene with amazement. Her living room had been transformed into something magical, not because royalty was present, but because genuine human connections were being celebrated and strengthened. Emma was glowing with happiness, surrounded by her friends and the special visitors who had taken time to enter their world. As the visit drew toward its close, Emma made one final request. She asked if everyone could work together on a group drawing, something that would commemorate this special day. Large sheets of paper were spread across the floor, and children, parents, and royal visitors all contributed to a collaborative artwork that captured the joy and connection of the afternoon. Catherine found herself lying on the floor next to Lucy, helping her draw flowers around the border of the paper. William was seated cross-legged, working with James on a detailed airplane that would fly across the top of the scene. Emma moved between different sections, adding her own touches and helping coordinate the overall design. The finished artwork was a beautiful chaos of colors, shapes, and symbols that told the story of an extraordinary day when barriers had dissolved and genuine friendships had been celebrated. Everyone signed their names somewhere on the paper, creating a permanent record of the connections that had been made and strengthened. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth that year, bringing with it news that would change everything once again. Emma's latest medical results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Holmes, called it remarkable progress, explaining to Sarah that Emma's response to treatment had been extraordinary. The tumor markers had dropped to levels they had hoped for, but hardly dared to expect. The news reached Kensington Palace through Emma's latest letter, written in handwriting that seemed stronger and more confident than ever before. Emma's excitement practically leaped off the page as she described feeling more energetic, being able to play outside again, and, most importantly, her doctor's cautious optimism about her long-term prognosis. But Emma's letter contained more than just medical updates. She had been thinking deeply about her experience over the past months, particularly about the visit from William and Catherine and the community of friends that had grown around her. At 8 years old, Emma had developed insights about human connection and resilience that many adults never achieve. Emma wrote about her realization that her illness, while scary and difficult, had led to some of the most meaningful relationships of her life. She had discovered that when people face challenges together, they often find strength they never knew they had. She had learned that kindness and support could come from the most unexpected places, and that sharing your struggles with others often helped everyone involved. Most significantly, Emma had decided she wanted to do something to help other children who were just beginning their own difficult journeys. She had an idea. She wrote to William and Catherine, and she wondered if they might help her make it happen. Emma's proposal was both simple and profound. She wanted to create care packages for newly diagnosed children in hospitals throughout England. These wouldn't be expensive or elaborate gifts, but collections of small items that had brought her comfort during her own treatment. Art supplies for creative expression, books for distraction and escape, soft blankets for comfort during treatments, and, most importantly, personal notes from children who had successfully navigated similar challenges. The idea had grown from Emma's own experience receiving unexpected kindness from William and Catherine. She remembered how much their personal attention had meant to her, how it had given her strength during her darkest moments. She wanted to pass that feeling forward to other children who were feeling scared and alone. Catherine read Emma's letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of thoughtfulness and compassion. This 8-year-old child, who was still receiving treatment herself, was proposing to dedicate her energy to supporting others facing similar challenges. It was exactly the kind of initiative that represented the best of human nature. William's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He recognized in Emma's proposal the same instinct that had driven his own charitable work, the understanding that personal experience with difficulty could be transformed into a force for helping others. Emma had intuitive grasp of something that had taken him years to fully understand about effective philanthropy. Within a week, William and Catherine were back in Yorkshire, this time to meet with Emma and her mother to discuss how they might help bring her vision to reality. This visit was different from the first. Emma was clearly stronger physically, more confident in her ideas, and excited about the possibility of creating something that could help other children. The planning meeting took place around the Mitchell family's kitchen table, with Emma presenting her ideas with the seriousness of someone much older. She had thought through many of the practical details, what items would be most useful, how to personalize each package, how to coordinate with hospitals to identify children who might benefit most from receiving them. Emma had also recruited her hospital friends to help with the project. James, who had given William the wooden airplane, was eager to contribute hand-carved toys for younger children. Lucy wanted to include pressed flowers from her grandmother's garden in each package. Other children from their informal support network had their own ideas for contributions. Catherine was struck by how naturally Emma had assumed a leadership role among her peers. Despite being younger than several of the other children, Emma had the vision and organizational skills to coordinate their various talents and interests into a coherent project. Her illness had not diminished her natural leadership abilities. If anything, it had focused and strengthened them. Williams suggested connecting Emma's initiative with some of the established children's charities he and Catherine already supported. This would provide the infrastructure and resources needed to expand Emma's idea beyond what she could manage on her own, while ensuring that her vision remained at the heart of the project. The first step was to pilot the program in the children's ward, where Emma had received much of her treatment. Dr. Holmes was immediately enthusiastic about the proposal, explaining that newly diagnosed children often felt overwhelmed and isolated during their first weeks of treatment. Having packages created by children who had successfully navigated similar challenges could provide both practical support and emotional encouragement. Emma insisted that each care package include a personal letter from a child who had experience with hospital treatment. She felt strongly that the most important element wasn't the physical items, but the message that other children had faced these challenges and found ways to cope and even thrive. Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into the project with remarkable energy. Despite continuing her own treatment schedule, she coordinated with her hospital friends to create the first batch of care packages. Each child contributed something unique: artwork, small crafts, books they had enjoyed, or games that had helped pass difficult hours. Catherine visited several times during this preparation phase, helping with practical details and providing encouragement. She was amazed by Emma's organizational skills and her ability to motivate other children to contribute their time and creativity to help strangers they would never meet. The personal letters were perhaps the most powerful component of each package. Emma helped coordinate these, encouraging each contributing child to share their own experiences honestly while focusing on hope and resilience. The letters were remarkably mature, offering practical advice about coping with treatment side effects, emotional support for dealing with fear and uncertainty, and assurance that feeling scared was normal and temporary. James wrote about the wooden crafts he had learned to make during his long recovery period, explaining how working with his hands had helped him feel productive and creative even when he was too sick for other activities. Lucy wrote about the comfort she had found in nature, describing how watching birds outside her hospital window had helped her feel connected to the world beyond her illness. Emma's own letter was included in every package. She wrote about the importance of finding small joys during difficult times, about the strength that came from accepting help from others, and about the unexpected friendships that could develop in hospitals. Her words carried the authority of lived experience combined with natural wisdom that belied her young age. When the first care packages were ready for distribution, Dr. Holmes invited Emma and several of her friends to help deliver them personally to newly admitted children. This proved to be an emotional experience for everyone involved. The young recipients were often amazed to meet children who had successfully navigated similar challenges and were now healthy enough to visit and offer support. One 7-year-old boy named Marcus, who had just begun treatment for brain cancer, was particularly moved by receiving a package. He had been withdrawn and fearful since his diagnosis, struggling to understand what was happening to him. When Emma sat with him and explained that she had been through similar treatments and was now feeling much better, Marcus's entire demeanor changed. The transformation was immediate and profound. Marcus began asking questions about Emma's experience, about the other children who had contributed to his package, and about what he could expect in the coming weeks. For the first time since his diagnosis, he seemed hopeful rather than simply frightened. Dr. Holmes documented the impact of these initial deliveries, noting significant improvements in the emotional states of children who received packages. The combination of practical support and peer encouragement seemed to help newly diagnosed children adjust more quickly to hospital routines and treatment protocols. Word of Emma's initiative began to spread beyond their local hospital. Other medical centers throughout northern England heard about the program and requested similar support for their young patients. What had started as one child's idea to help a few other children was rapidly expanding into something much larger. William and Catherine recognized that Emma had created something with the potential for national impact. Her intuitive understanding of what children needed during medical crises, combined with her natural leadership abilities, had produced a model that could be replicated throughout the healthcare system. The success of the Care Package program also attracted attention from medical professionals studying pediatric psychology and patient support systems. Researchers were interested in documenting the measurable impacts of peer support on treatment outcomes and emotional resilience in children facing serious illnesses. Dr. Sarah Williams, a child psychologist at a leading children's hospital in London, reached out to Emma and her family to discuss studying the program's effectiveness. She was particularly interested in the role of peer-created content in helping children develop coping strategies and maintain hope during extended treatment periods. Emma was initially nervous about being studied by researchers, but her natural curiosity about learning and helping others eventually overcame her concerns. She agreed to participate in interviews and surveys, understanding that the research could help expand the program to help even more children. The preliminary research results were remarkable. Children who received Emma's care packages showed measurably better emotional adjustment to hospital treatment, greater compliance with medical protocols, and improved communication with healthcare providers. The peer support element seemed to be particularly effective in helping children feel less isolated and more hopeful about their prognosis. But perhaps the most significant finding was the impact on the children creating the packages. Emma and her friends, who continued contributing despite their own ongoing medical needs, showed exceptional resilience and positive outlook. The act of helping others seemed to strengthen their own ability to cope with their challenges. Emma's mother, Sarah, watched her daughter's transformation with amazement. The shy, frightened child who had been diagnosed just over a year ago had become a confident leader, inspiring other children and catching the attention of medical professionals and researchers. Emma's illness had undoubtedly been traumatic, but it had also revealed strengths and capabilities that might never have emerged under other circumstances. The spring months brought continued good news about Emma's health, along with growing recognition of her contribution to pediatric patient support. She received letters from children throughout England who had received her care packages, sharing their own recovery stories and expressing gratitude for the encouragement they had received. Catherine found herself thinking often about Emma's journey from frightened patient to inspiring leader. The child's story embodied everything Catherine hoped to achieve through her own charitable work. The transformation of personal challenge into a force for helping others, the power of human connection to provide strength and hope, and the remarkable resilience of children facing adversity. As summer approached, Emma's latest medical scans showed continued improvement. Her oncologist was now using words like excellent response and very optimistic prognosis when discussing her case. Emma's physical recovery was paralleling her emotional growth, creating a positive cycle that seemed to strengthen both aspects of her healing. The care package program had grown beyond anything Emma had initially imagined. What had started as her simple desire to help a few other children had become a formal initiative supported by multiple hospitals and backed by research demonstrating its effectiveness. Emma's name was becoming known throughout the pediatric medical community as the child who had revolutionized peer support for young patients. But for Emma herself, the most important aspect remained the individual connections she made with other children. She continued to write personal letters for each care package, to visit newly diagnosed children when her health permitted, and to coordinate with her hospital friends to ensure that every package reflected the genuine caring that had inspired the project from its beginning. The invitation arrived on official palace stationery, but the message inside was written in Catherine's own handwriting. Emma read it twice before the words fully registered. The princess was inviting her to attend a special reception at Kensington Palace, not as a charity case or publicity opportunity, but as a recognized young leader in children's healthcare advocacy. The reception was being organized to honor individuals who had made significant contributions to improving the lives of children facing medical challenges. Emma's care package program had grown so successful and widely recognized that she was being acknowledged alongside doctors, researchers, and established charity leaders who had dedicated their careers to pediatric health care. Emma's first reaction was excitement, followed quickly by nervousness. At 9 years old, she would be the youngest person honored at the reception. She worried about whether she would know what to say, how to act around all the important adults who would be present, and whether she truly deserved recognition alongside people with much more experience and formal education. Sarah Mitchell watched her daughter grapple with these concerns with a mixture of pride and amazement. The child who had been frightened by her initial diagnosis had grown into someone who was genuinely worried about living up to her responsibilities as a recognized leader in healthcare advocacy. Emma's maturity and sense of purpose had developed far beyond her chronological age. The months leading up to the reception were filled with continued growth for Emma's program. The care packages were now being distributed by over 30 hospitals throughout England, with plans for expansion into Scotland and Wales. Medical researchers had published papers documenting the program's effectiveness, and several international children's hospitals had requested guidance on implementing similar initiatives. Emma had also begun speaking at medical conferences, sharing her perspective on patient support and peer encouragement. Her presentations, while simple and straightforward, offered insights that experienced healthcare professionals found both moving and practically useful. She had an intuitive understanding of what children needed during medical crises that complemented the technical expertise of doctors and nurses. One particularly memorable conference presentation had focused on the importance of maintaining normal childhood experiences during medical treatment. Emma described how art projects, games with friends, and simple conversations about topics other than illness had been crucial for her emotional well-being during treatment. Her recommendations had influenced policy changes at several hospitals, leading to expanded recreation programs and more flexible visiting schedules. Dr. Patricia Holmes, who had become one of Emma's strongest professional advocates, often accompanied her to these speaking engagements. She marveled at Emma's ability to communicate complex emotional concepts in language that was both accessible and profound. Emma had developed into an exceptional advocate not despite her young age, but because of the fresh perspective and authentic experience she brought to discussions about pediatric care. As the palace reception approached, Emma's own health continued to improve dramatically. Her latest scans showed no evidence of active disease, and her oncologist had begun using the word remission more confidently. Emma was still receiving maintenance treatments, but her prognosis had evolved from cautiously optimistic to genuinely hopeful. The physical improvements were matched by continued emotional and intellectual growth. Emma had started a blog about her experiences, writing posts that attracted readers from around the world. Her writing was remarkably sophisticated for her age, combining personal insights about facing illness with practical advice for other children and families navigating similar challenges. One blog post that had particularly resonated with readers described Emma's thoughts about the relationship between being sick and being strong. She wrote about learning that strength didn't mean not being scared or sad, but rather continuing to find ways to help others and maintain hope even when facing uncertainty. The post had been shared thousands of times and had generated responses from children and adults on multiple continents. Emma's influence was extending beyond healthcare into broader discussions about childhood resilience and leadership. Educational researchers had begun studying her development as an example of how children could transform personal adversity into community leadership. Her story was being included in curricula designed to help other children understand their own potential for making positive impacts. The week before the palace reception, Emma received a special visitor. Prince Harry, who was in England for family events, had asked to meet the young woman whose work he had been following through William and Catherine's updates. Harry was particularly interested in Emma's insights about mental health and resilience, topics that had become central to his own advocacy work. The meeting took place at the Mitchell family home, maintaining the personal, informal atmosphere that had characterized all of Emma's interactions with the royal family. Harry was immediately struck by Emma's combination of wisdom and natural childhood enthusiasm. She could discuss serious topics about healthcare and emotional support with remarkable depth, then immediately shift to excited chatter about her favorite books or television programs. Harry was particularly impressed by Emma's perspective on the relationship between personal struggle and community service. Emma explained that her illness had taught her that everyone had challenges, and that people who had successfully navigated difficulties had a responsibility to help others facing similar situations. Her understanding of service was remarkably mature, rooted in personal experience rather than abstract concepts. During their conversation, Emma shared some of her hopes for the future. She wanted to continue expanding her care package program, but she also had dreams of becoming a doctor herself someday. She was particularly interested in pediatric psychology, having observed during her own treatment how much the emotional aspects of illness affected children's ability to heal and cope. Harry was moved by Emma's clarity about her goals and her realistic understanding of the work required to achieve them. Despite her young age and ongoing medical treatment, Emma was already planning her education and considering how she could maximize her impact on children's healthcare throughout her life. The day of the palace reception arrived with crisp autumn weather and brilliant sunshine. Emma had chosen her outfit carefully, a simple but elegant dress in her favorite blue color, paired with the special bracelet Catherine had given her more than a year ago. She wanted to look appropriate for the formal setting while wearing something that reminded her of the personal connection that had started her journey. Sarah accompanied Emma to London, both of them marveling at the surreal nature of the experience. Just 18 months earlier, they had been a struggling family facing a terrifying diagnosis with limited resources and uncertain prospects. Now, they were traveling to Kensington Palace for Emma to be honored as a recognized leader in healthcare advocacy. The reception was held in the palace's elegant staterooms, with approximately 50 guests representing various aspects of children's healthcare and advocacy. Emma was indeed the youngest honoree, but she found herself warmly welcomed by the other attendees, many of whom had followed her work and were eager to meet her in person. William and Catherine greeted Emma with the warmth of old friends, immediately putting her at ease in the formal setting. They introduced her to other guests as someone whose work they particularly admired, giving her credibility and confidence as she navigated conversations with prominent doctors, researchers, and charity leaders. The formal portion of the reception included brief presentations by several honorees about their work and its impact. When Emma's turn came, she approached the podium with visible nervousness, but her voice was clear and strong as she spoke about her experience and the program that had grown from it. Emma's presentation was different from the others in its simplicity and directness. She didn't use technical terms or complex statistics, but instead told stories about individual children she had met and how their courage had inspired her own work. She spoke about James and his wooden airplanes, Lucy and her pressed flowers, and Marcus and his transformation from frightened patient to confident advocate. The audience was visibly moved by Emma's presentation. Several doctors commented afterward that her perspective on patient experience provided insights they hadn't fully considered despite years of professional experience. Emma's ability to articulate the emotional and social aspects of childhood illness complemented their medical expertise in ways that could improve care for all young patients. After the formal presentations, guests mingled informally, and Emma found herself engaged in serious conversations with some of the country's leading pediatric specialists. They asked her opinions about hospital design, treatment protocols, and family support programs. Emma's responses, while based on personal experience rather than professional training, offered valuable perspectives that these experts recognized as important contributions to their field. Dr. Sarah Williams, the child psychologist who had been studying Emma's program, introduced her to colleagues who were working on national policy initiatives for pediatric care. They were interested in incorporating Emma's insights into recommendations for healthcare systems throughout the country. Emma's voice was being included in discussions at the highest levels of medical policymaking. Perhaps the most meaningful moment of the reception came when Emma was approached by a teenage girl named Rebecca, who had received one of Emma's care packages 3 years earlier when the program was just beginning. Rebecca, now 16 and cancer-free, had traveled to London specifically to thank Emma in person for the encouragement that had helped her through her darkest period. Rebecca described how Emma's personal letter, included in her care package, had given her hope when she felt most afraid and alone. The letter had convinced her that recovery was possible and that she could find strength she didn't know she had. Rebecca had kept Emma's letter throughout her treatment, reading it whenever she needed extra courage. The conversation between Emma and Rebecca represented the full circle of the program Emma had created. A young girl's simple desire to help other children had grown into a systematic approach to peer support that was now helping children throughout the country. Rebecca's presence at the reception demonstrated the long-term impact of Emma's work and validated the program's effectiveness in ways that formal research studies couldn't capture. As the reception concluded, Catherine presented Emma with a special recognition, a framed photograph of the collaborative artwork created during that first visit to Yorkshire, along with a formal citation acknowledging Emma's contribution to children's healthcare advocacy. But, more importantly, Catherine expressed her personal gratitude for Emma's friendship and the inspiration she had provided. Emma's response was characteristically thoughtful and mature. She thanked William and Catherine not just for their support of her program, but for teaching her through their example that leadership meant serving others, particularly those who needed help most. She credited their initial kindness with showing her that she could transform her own difficult experience into something that helped other children. The reception had been designed to honor individuals who had made significant contributions to children's healthcare, but it had evolved into something more profound. It had become a celebration of the connections between personal experience and community service, between individual struggle and collective healing, between the vulnerability of childhood and the strength that could emerge from facing challenges with support and courage. On the train journey back to Yorkshire, Emma reflected on how much her life had changed since that first frightening diagnosis. She was still receiving treatment and would need continued monitoring for years to come. But she was no longer defined primarily by her illness. Instead, she had become someone whose experience with challenge had been transformed into a source of strength and service for others. Emma's story had started with a simple letter from a worried mother to people she hoped might provide encouragement to her sick child. It had grown into a nationwide program that was changing how hospitals supported young patients and their families. But perhaps most importantly, it had demonstrated the extraordinary impact that could result when people responded to each other's needs with genuine care and personal attention. The quiet gesture that had begun Emma's journey, William and Catherine's decision to respond personally to a child's situation rather than through formal channels, had rippled outward in ways none of them could have anticipated. Emma's care packages were now helping hundreds of children each year, but the program's deeper impact was its demonstration that individual acts of kindness could create lasting change in systems and communities. Emma continued her advocacy work throughout her teenage years, eventually establishing a formal foundation to expand peer support programs internationally. She pursued her goal of becoming a pediatric psychologist, using her unique combination of personal experience and professional training to improve healthcare for children around the world. Years later, when Emma was invited to speak at medical conferences or policy forums, she would often begin her presentations by describing that first letter from William and Catherine and how their simple act of personal attention had changed her understanding of her own potential to help others. She would remind her audiences that the most powerful interventions often came not from complex systems or expensive technologies, but from genuine human connections and the decision to treat each person's struggle as worthy of individual attention and care. Emma's story became a lasting reminder that extraordinary impact could grow from ordinary kindness, that children were capable of remarkable leadership when given support and encouragement, and that the most meaningful royal duties were often those performed quietly, personally, and without fanfare. The quiet gesture had indeed created a powerful impact, one that continued to ripple outward, touching lives and strengthening communities long after the original letters had been written and received.